More laws, by the way. The Lord said to Moses, that was the sexual laws. Okay, we don't want to hear the sexual laws. We don't want to hear that we're not allowed to have sex with certain people. That's just, we are going to put our fingers in our ears or our hands over our ears and just not listen to that. The rest of this book of Leviticus we can ignore. No one is worrying about sacrificing goats or bulls or lambs or birds or anything like that anymore. And no one is worried about building a temporary little hut to live in for 1 week out of the year or anything along those lines. But we do not want to hear that we're not supposed to have sex with certain people. That is just something that we simply do not want to hear anymore. Now this law, of course, is conditional to that nation at that time. And their conduct, according to this law, is what determined the conditions about whether or not they got to live in the land. We'll read about that as we get to the end of Leviticus and later in Deuteronomy about the conditions for keeping the land were based on their faithfulness to this covenant. So we don't necessarily have to live by this today, according to the terms of the covenant. But these laws are always reflected in some aspect of life in our lives today. These are all physical demonstrations of spiritual concepts. And Paul, for example, is going to have things to say about sex in his letters later on. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the entire assembly of Israel, and say to them, Be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy." We've heard that a lot mentioned in Leviticus. "Each of you must respect his mother and father, and you must observe my Sabbath." So, by the way, we're going to be restating all the commandments here in this section. So there's a couple of them right there. Honor the father and mother and keep the Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make gods of cast metal for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When you sacrifice a fellowship offering to the Lord, sacrifice it in such a way that it will be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the next day. Anything left over until the third day must be burned up. If any of it is eaten on the third day, it is impure and will not be accepted. Whoever eats it will be held responsible, because he has desecrated what is holy to the Lord. That person must be cut off from his people. When you reap the harvest of your land, which they're not going to do until they get in the land, but when you do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not deceive one another. Do not swear falsely by my name, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Now, you mentioned when we saw this written in Exodus 20, that swearing falsely by the name of God really means to utter an oath or make a vow in the name of God and then not fulfill the terms of that vow. That's really what it means to swear falsely. We don't really do that so much today, so that concept is not very prominent in our culture. We have a little bit of it, like when you put your hand on the Bible and swear to take office or whatever like that, but of course no one pays attention to that anymore either. Like that doesn't mean anything to anybody anymore either, but it's like we don't really have that aspect in our culture today, but it really means, it doesn't mean saying like bad words like goddamn or something like that. I mean, that could fit into a definition of repulsive language, which we can get about when we get to the New Testament times. Don't use repulsive language, or a language that would offend your hearers, people who are listening to you, that would be bothered by that. But it really isn't talking about that. Swearing falsely by the name of God doesn't really mean that. It really means taking a vow or an oath in the name of God and not fulfilling the terms of that vow. Or it's doing it and not intending to fulfill the terms of that vow even. Do not defraud your neighbor or rob him. Do not hold back the wages of a hired man overnight. This, of course, refers to the idea of hiring someone to work for a day. When you've hired someone, we don't really have that concept. Not too much. You might see a little bit of like day hires, but it's like the idea is that you hire a guy to work for a day. He works for the day. He goes home in the evening. Pay him for that day for the work he did that day. If you hire him again tomorrow, pay him tomorrow. Okay. We don't. Again, that's not really a part of our culture. Maybe a little bit here and there, but not a whole heck of a lot. But that's what that's referring to. Do not curse. Jesus actually makes a parable about that later on. He actually bases a parable on that concept of hiring someone to work for the day. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. I am the Lord. Of course, the deaf can't hear you if you curse them, and the blind can't see you if you put a stumbling block in front of them. So you're taking advantage of them in their infirmities and in their weaknesses and their handicaps. But God is not blind and he is not deaf. So fear your God and do not do those things. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Now, we're going to have more of a problem with showing favoritism to the great. That's going to be more of a human tendency to do that. We're not supposed to do that, but we're also not supposed to show partiality to the poor either. That's also forbidden. We tend not to do that as much anyway, but we're not supposed to. Just like we're not supposed to show favoritism to the great. Judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so you will not share in his guilt. So when he does something, even something bad against you, don't hate him in your heart, but rebuke him frankly so you will not share in his guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That's the second greatest commandment according to Jesus. Keep my decrees. Do not mate different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. Basically, this is a reference to God made creation the way he wanted it to be made. He ordained it, he set it up, he made everything according to its kind, as you read about in Genesis. This is another reference to that kind concept in Genesis. And he made everything according to its kind, and he wants it to stay that way. If we mix and match the kinds, then we're going against God's order for creation and showing disrespect to him as creator and to his creation. If a man sleeps with a woman who is a slave girl promised to another man, but who has not been ransomed or given her freedom, there must be due punishment. Yet they are not to be put to death because she had not been freed. I'm assuming this is consensual sex here. We're not talking about rape. I think we're talking about two people willingly getting together. The man, however, must bring a ram to the entrance to the tent of meeting for a guilt offering to the Lord. With the ram of the guilt offering, the priest is to make atonement for him before the Lord for the sin he has committed, and his sin will be forgiven. When you enter the land and plant any kind of fruit tree, regard its fruit as forbidden. For 3 years you are to consider it forbidden. It must not be eaten. In the 4th year, all its fruit will be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord. So that's its first fruits. It's literally its first batch of fruits. But in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit. In this way, your harvest will be increased. I am the Lord your God. Do not eat meat with the blood still in it. Do not practice divination or sorcery. Divination would be trying to divine the favors of the gods by things like casting lots or reading the entrails of slain animals, which they did. And sorcery would be like consulting spirits or practicing magic arts. Do not cut the hair at the sides of your head. I don't know if that means sideburns or what that's referring to, frankly. Or clip the edges off your beard. Doesn't actually say to grow a beard here. It says not to clip the edges off your beard. I'm assuming this is a reference to something that the pagans of that area were doing in terms of grooming their beards a specific way. I really don't know. If you look at the monumental art from this region of the world at this day and time, you'll see that a lot of them had very stylized beards. You look at the kings and other figures who appear on these pots that we still have from this region of the world in that day and time. They had these long, thick beards that were very stylized on the sides and at the bottom. So maybe it's referring to that. I really honestly don't know. Now this I don't believe is to be taken as a command for Christians to grow Christian men to grow beards today. I'm not even sure if it should be taken as a command for Jewish men to grow beards. I mean, we did read about them specifically being commanded to shave their beards under certain circumstances. Obviously, they would grow them back out again. But honestly, I think these men just wanted to grow beards because they wanted to be manly men, honestly. I think it was just a matter of, in their culture, they thought that men should grow beards because men can grow beards, so they should. I believe that's where it ultimately comes from. I don't think God ever actually told them to. I just think they had the idea in their minds that they should because they're men and men can grow beards, so men should grow beards. Otherwise, you're a woman. And I really believe that's where their thought processes came from. Do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. This again refers to mourning practices that they did where they would get. We talk about, in today's culture, we have things like anorexia or bulimia or other sorts of disorders, eating disorders, behavioral disorders in young people. One of the types of disorders out there for maladjusted young people is cutting themselves. And this kind of refers to something very similar, that you would cut yourself or gash yourself to express your deep mourning over your dead loved one. Or if you were a priest, you would do it in order to try to coerce your God into showing favor to you, and that was forbidden. So this is specifically referring to practices of the nations around them that the Israelites are not to engage in. Do not degrade your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will turn to prostitution and be filled with wickedness. Observe my Sabbaths. This is actually referring to degrading the daughter. For once, we actually have her value in mind with one of these laws. Observe my Sabbaths and have reverence for my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists. Those are the ones who consult the spirits of the dead. For you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Which of course they would do. They would do all this stuff eventually. They would not keep themselves from doing these things. Rise in the presence of the aged. Show respect for the elderly and revere your God. I am the Lord. We certainly don't do that today. If there's one thing among all the things in this book that we don't do today and gladly don't do today, it's show respect for the elderly. Like, we just can't wait for them to die. In our day and time today, we have no use for anything over a certain age, and we just can't wait for them to die. When an alien lives with you in your land, do not mistreat him. The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were aliens in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Boy, Donald Trump should hear that, shouldn't he? Ha! Donald Trump and his minions should take that lesson to heart now, shouldn't they? Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, weight, or quantity. Use honest scales and honest weights, an honest ephah and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. Now, in their day and time, they didn't necessarily have money, per se. They had silver, they had gold, but they exchanged goods in terms of weights. They didn't necessarily had denominations of money, per se, as much as you would literally measure when you're exchanging with somebody, you would have a scale, and you would put your stuff that you're giving and the stuff the other guy is giving on a scale, and you would want it to be even, which means you're giving an equal amount of stuff to each other. If you're dishonest, you could weight the scales so that the other guy would have to end up paying you more. We don't really follow this very much at all in today's culture, but that's the sort of, it's kind of like going to a cash register and checking out and giving them cash or a check or a credit card, okay, and giving them the right amount of money to pay for the item that you're buying. It's just instead of doing that, you have scales, and you're trying to each put things on the scales, silver, gold, whatever, that need to even out to be the same, and that is a fair exchange then. But some people would try to trick the scales and design them so that it favored them, so that they ended up paying less and the other guy ended up paying more. That's cheating him. Keep all my decrees and all my laws and follow them. I am the Lord. Over and over again in this section, the rationale for the laws is simply, I am the Lord. He says that many, many, many times here. I am the Lord. I am the Lord. I am the Lord. And in the end, the reason for these laws ultimately comes down to, I am the Lord. There may be some health or hygienic benefits to them. Modern day Christian scholars have tried to find such things hidden within this text, and there may be some validity to that. But the reason given for why the Israelites were to do these things is because he was the Lord. He was their God. He brought them up out of Egypt to be their God, for him to be their people. He is holy. He is consecrated. He is set apart. He is pure. And so should they be. And that is the reason given.